The following is a presentation of New Worker Radio. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily represent those of WZML, its staff, or management.
Hello, and welcome to New Worker News on WZML 92.9. My name is Manolis, bringing you national and international updates from a worker's perspective. To begin, here is Yanis with the local news.
Thank you, Manolis. At midnight on June 30th, the current contract between the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Union, AFSCME, and the City of Philadelphia and other Philadelphia municipal authorities expired. Despite the fact that this expiration was known well in advance, the union has been silent on any ongoing negotiations or even potential contracts, which has left many city employees working under an expired contract. In Philadelphia, AFSCME represents the majority of city workers, from the police and firefighters to museum and sanitation workers. The locals which represent the police and firefighters were quick to accept the one-year deals with the city, but AFSCME, District Council 33 and 47, who represent the city's blue and white-collar workers respectively, have not followed suit. The current president of AFSCME, DC 33, campaigned on fighting for a multi-year contract deal, so it is likely that the union is hesitant to accept a one-year deal. There has been little to no communication from the union about the contract. So far, the only communication about the contract from DC 33 has been a letter from the president published on June 30th, which asked members to be patient while the executive board met with the city to negotiate the following week. This is completely unacceptable. There has been a complete lack of mention of striking for a better contract with the city. The union has completely failed to prepare the workers to strike and has instead opted to go the losing route of social dialogue. It is important to understand that the most substantial gains we as workers can win can only come from militant struggle against the bosses and the capitalist state. We cannot fall for the lie that there are wins in a social dialogue-based strategy. Contract negotiations are real-life battles against the bosses, and the only way for these negotiations to produce good contracts is to approach them militantly. Part of this must be preparing for the possibility of a strike. If the employer knows that you are not ready to strike, not ready to fight them, then what reason do they have to give in to your demands? In not preparing the city workers to strike, the union leadership has done a massive disservice to the workers and has set them up for failure. It is clear that the current union leadership values labor peace over fighting for real substantial gains in the contracts. Despite this, it is not too late for the workers themselves to organize, to prepare to strike. We have to remember that the power of the unions come from the collective might of its rank and file. And now for our next story. On June 12th, Aramark workers held a protest outside of Aramark headquarters in Philadelphia, where at least 45 people were arrested. The workers' union, Unite Here Local 274, has been negotiating with Aramark for months now, and have even engaged in sporadic strikes since earlier this year. The workers, many of whom work at all three sports stadiums in the city, have been demanding better health care and equal pay between the three stadiums. As it stands now, the same worker could be paid $18 an hour at one stadium while only making $15 an hour when working at another. Further, workers have been demanding that those who work for a total of 750 hours a year be eligible for health care. Aramark, on the other hand, wants to set it to 1,500 hours. It was in the context of these negotiations that Unite Here held a protest outside of Aramark headquarters. Several hundred members of Unite Here gathered holding signs that read, quote, "Equal treatment now," among other demands. The arrest came after about 45 people sat in the middle of the street and refused police orders. Among those arrested were State Senator Nikhil Saval, a Democratic Party member, the president of the Philadelphia Council AFL-CIO, Daniel Broder, and Gwen Mills, the president of Unite Here International Union. It is unfortunate to say, but these arrests were nothing more than a PR stunt to boost the campaign of a bourgeois politician and further intertwine the worker struggle with one of the bourgeois parties. The union planned this act of civil disobedience, as they call it, from the beginning, even having those who planned to be arrested tie black bandanas to their arms to denote their willingness to get arrested. It is clear that this was done to simply provide these bourgeois politicians and labor bureaucrats with an air of false labor militancy and credibility. Saval himself is seeking re-election this November, and there can be no doubt that he and his campaign cynically calculated that this little stunt could boost his polling come November. The working class, in its struggle against the capitalists, cannot and must not be content with operating within bourgeois legality. That is to say, we should be willing to take actions that are deemed illegal. After all, the entire legal system, including the labor laws, will always favor the bosses over the workers. Only when the workers are able to struggle effectively outside of the confines of the law will the courts acquiesce to the demands of the workers. History has proven this. The NLRA itself is a testament to this. It took decades of militant and illegal fighting by the working class before the capitalist state was forced to extend bourgeois legality to unions and strikes. Workers should be prepared to confront the bosses even if threatened with arrest, but the goal isn't to be arrested for nothing. We have to ensure that the actions taken which threaten arrest actually advance the fight, that they actually benefit the movement. For example, imagine the courts were to deem a strike illegal, and they imposed an already rejected bad contract on the workers. The workers, rejecting this, then went on strike anyways. This action would no doubt risk arrest and brutal police repression, but it would be a risk worth taking, because the alternative would be losing everything they fought to gain before. But to have workers and the union staff engaged in such a performative stunt, where the entire goal is to be arrested, is completely unacceptable. Furthermore, to attach the workers and their struggle to a capitalist politician like Nikhil Saval is a betrayal of the workers. It does nothing to actually help the workers in their just struggle for their demands. On the contrary, it jeopardizes the entire movement. The workers' movement must be independent of the parties of the monopolies. Nikhil is beholden to capitalist interests just like every other bourgeois politician. Saval's 2020 campaign saw contributions from capitalists like Christopher Papot, a current investor with the Social Venture Circle and a former CEO of Ahoka Corporation, which supplies wholesale distribution of plumbing supplies. Another being Kim Kamen, the wife of Adam Kamen, who is the CEO of Aminio Manufacturing Corporation, which manufactures furniture and fabricates custom items for architects. The list goes on, but to drive the point, there is also Daniel Rhodes Jr. of Rhodes Industries, who provides industrial fabrication, installation, and maintenance for commercial and government projects. It is clear that Saval is being funded by the petty bourgeoisie within the construction branch of production at the very least. While these capitalists might not be as big and dominant as the bourgeoisie proper, their interests remain contrary to those of the working class. This money that they give is not given for free. They expect a return on their investment, so to speak, in the form of Saval promoting their interest in office. Nikhil Saval, far from being pro-worker, is actually beholden to the interests of the small capitalists in Pennsylvania. We as workers must reject all of these capitalist politicians and work actively to push them out of our movement. They are the avenue through which the bosses, the very capitalists that we fight against, infiltrate, capture, and make impotent the workers' movement. And we must fight to weed them out of our movement, root and branch.
We'll be right back with more of New Worker News here on 92.9 FM WZML. But I want to remind you that every day throughout this country, workers are subjected to injustices and humiliation at the hands of the capitalists, from unpaid wages to mass layoffs. So we at New Worker understand the tyranny that the workplace is for workers. This is why we fight to expose these injustices. Only through militant organization of the working class can we stand toe-to-toe against the bosses. So this is why we want to hear from you, the listener. Are you having issues at work? Bosses cutting your hours or wages? Are you or your fellow workers' safety being thrown out of the window in the name of ever-increasing profit? Well, you are not alone. So reach out to us to tell your story. You can anonymously send an email or even a voice memo to cwpusa@protonmail.com. Again, that is cwpusa@protonmail.com. And check us out online at newworker.us. And now back to New Worker Radio, only here on 92.9 FM, WZML.
I now turn it over to Manolis for national and international news.
We hear about the rising prices of basic goods, bills, and the overall cost of living. Inflation is often cited as the cause, with the suggested solution being to work harder, perhaps taking on a second or third job to cope with the escalating expenses. However, if we revisit Marxist theory, we see that each product carries a value derived from the socially necessary labor required to produce it. This includes not just the labor involving in making, say, a bicycle in the factory, but also the labor that is embedded in the machines used in production, which depreciates incrementally with each bicycle made. When the product is sold, this value is realized. Part of it becomes the worker's salary, while the surplus value, in other words the profit, goes into the pockets of the capitalists. In a capitalist economy, various factors drive inflation, but one of the most significant is the necessity for both ordinary people and capitalists to borrow. Ordinary people, who contribute to the production of goods, must purchase these products. Here lies the fundamental dilemma of capitalism. Workers can afford to pay the full value for all products because a portion of that value, the surplus value, has been taken. This leaves them with insufficient means to access the total value of goods produced. So what's the solution? In capitalist society, is to lend people money that isn't backed by produced goods. Similarly, capitalists also need to borrow money. As production advances, the profit relative to investment decreases, leading to a shortage of capital for further investment, necessitating borrowing. The more you produce, the more there is to sell, yet the less people can afford to buy everything, and the less profit capitalists can make to reinvest in further production. This necessitates borrowing more money to keep the system running. In such a scenario, extra money is printed, which essentially amounts to mere pieces of paper. This approach works for a while, but this money lacks intrinsic value. Its worth is not based on real value, but on confidence in the state and capital. When this trust falters, the system becomes unstable. Trust can be easily shaken, especially since some of the money in circulation is not backed by real labor value. Consequently, sellers demand more money today than they did yesterday for the same goods, requiring even more money to be circulated, perpetuating an inflationary cycle. You could say that the extra money driving inflation is essentially borrowing from future production and future value, the value that will be created by the next generations of workers. Inflation is thus built into the functioning of capitalism. It can fluctuate back and forth depending on which capitalists produce, how much the working class can get their demands through, and how close in time an economic collapse and subsequent restart of the economy took place. And depending on efforts and measures from the government, inflation can sometimes be managed, confidence in the economy restored, or the effects mitigated. But in the long run, the economy eventually collapses when inflation is pushed to the limit. Everyone remembers 2008, or the crisis during the pandemic. We're not there yet, but there is no reason to put our faith in the solutions of the various political parties, which at best become temporary band-aids on the wounds, and at worst provide bad solutions for the working class, with wages kept down and subsidies that benefit the rich. A lasting solution to the expensive times can only be guaranteed by a system that does not work for profit. This is the socialist planned economy. This is why the Communist Workers' Platform continues to propose the only step on the way there is joining our struggle to reconstruct the Communist Party. November is not going to give us socialism, but within the ranks of the Communist Workers' Platform, we can carve out that path. The story focuses on Meta Inc., the owner of Facebook, which is wrapped up in controversy as it continues to be exposed for bias against Palestine. A former Meta engineer, Faraz Ahmad, a Palestinian American who had been on Meta's machine learning team since 2021, sued the social media giant in a California court for discrimination, wrongful termination, and other misconduct related to his firing in February. In the lawsuit, Ahmad accused Meta of bias against Palestinians, claiming the company deleted internal messages from employees mentioning the deaths of their relatives in Gaza and conducted investigations into the use of the Palestinian flag emoji. The company did not initiate such investigations for employees who posted emojis with Israeli or Ukrainian flags in a similar context, the lawsuit alleges. Ahmad's claims reflect long-standing criticism from human rights groups about Meta's performance in moderating content about Israel and the Palestinian territories published on its platforms, including in an external investigation the company commissioned in 2021. Since the outbreak of war last year, the company has faced accusations of suppressing expressions of support for Palestinians living in the midst of war. Earlier this year, nearly 200 Meta employees expressed similar concerns in an open letter to CEO Mark Zuckerberg and other executives. Ahmad stated that his dismissal seemed to result from a December incident involving an emergency process for resolving major issues with the company's platforms, referred to at Meta as SEV, or known as Site Event. According to the complaint, Ahmad had identified procedural irregularities in handling an ETS related to content restrictions on Palestinian Instagram personalities, which prevented their posts from appearing in search results and feeds. In one case, the complaint said he found that a short video posted by Palestinian photojournalist Motaz was falsely classified as pornographic, even though it showed a destroyed building in Gaza. Ahmad said he received conflicting information from other staff members about the status of the site event and whether he was authorized to help resolve the issue, even though he had previously worked on similar sensitive site events, including those involving Israel, the Gaza Strip, and Ukraine. His supervisor later confirmed in writing that the site event was part of his responsibilities. The next month, after a Meta representative told him he was the subject of an investigation, Ahmad filed an internal discrimination complaint and was fired a few days later, he said. Meta told him he was fired for violating a policy that prohibits employees from working on issues related to accounts of people they know personally, referring to Aziza, the photojournalist. Ahmad said he had no personal connection to Aziza. We see here how the monopolies are completely complicit in the status quo, not attempting to challenge the genocide of the Palestinian people for fear of losing out on consumers and investors. Such an attitude reflects Meta's attempt to not damage its multi-million-dollar investments from Israel announced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry in 2022. It is no wonder that Meta joined the chorus of other tech executives from the major monopolies Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and IBM, all standing alongside Israel. U.S. news, the presidential debate wrapped up on June 27th, demonstrating the lack of solutions the bourgeois political system offers to the people of the U.S. In the aftermath of the presidential debate, President Joe Biden is the main loser against Republican candidate Donald Trump, sparking discussions about potentially changing the Democratic candidate for the upcoming November presidential elections. The two candidates clashed on issues like abortion, immigration, the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, and economic management, while also engaging in personal attacks. Although polls indicate a close race, Trump currently leads in several swing states that often determine the election outcome. In the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, about a fifth of voters remain undecided. Following the debate, where 81-year-old Biden often seemed at a loss for words, there was significant backlash from Democratic circles. David Axelrod, a key strategic advisor to former President Obama, told CNN there will be discussions
about whether he should continue as the party leader. At the same time, some lawmakers described Biden's performance as disastrous. During the debate, Trump accused Biden of not being tough on trade with China. He also claimed that Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, and Vladimir Putin have no respect for Biden, asserting that the Democrat is leading the country into World War III. What was clear is that both remain firm in their desire to continue commitment to the murderous Israeli state, the domination of the monopolies, and their mockery of the workers and people with their stale attempts at hegemony. Headlines in U.S. media declared, "Democrats are in a panic." The Washington Post reported widespread surprise at Biden's negative image, from the halls of Congress to campaign donors and among Democrats gathered in various settings nationwide to support him. In a CNN poll conducted immediately after the debate, when asked, "Who would you vote for in the election?" 48% chose Trump, 40% chose Biden, 2% selected both, and 11% responded none. It is important to emphasize that those responding none recognize that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats offer a way out. That 1 in 10 voters are now choosing to reject the logic of the lesser of two evils bodes well for the prospects of the revolutionary movement in our country. Currently, no fighting alternatives or paths forward exist for the workers and people. Between the Democrats, the Republicans, and the other existing so-called alternatives, such as Jill Stein, Cornel West, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Chase Oliver, Claudia de la Cruz, etc., none of them will change our situation. The only real option for the working class is to organize, resist, and fight to transform reality in service of their class interests. This means joining the ranks of those struggling to rebuild the only vehicle that can lead this revolutionary transformation of society, that is, the Communist Party. In international news, a coup attempt was carried out in Bolivia by the former military chief of Bolivia, Juan José Zúñiga. Armored vehicles headed towards the presidential palace and rammed the building's doors. Bolivian TV has since shown clips of President Arce confronting the military chief and ordering a retreat. He then appointed a new commander-in-chief, and the soldiers retreated under new orders. However, what actually happened is not entirely clear. According to the Bolivian daily El Deber, Zúñiga said that he had acted at the president's request, apparently to increase the president's popularity. He is said to have asked if tanks were going to the streets and received an affirmative answer. Zúñiga had recently been ousted from his post after several threats against former President Evo Morales, who intends to stand in the 2025 elections. Evo Morales, who ruled Bolivia between 2007 and 2017, has reacted strongly to the events and condemned the coup attempt. He had the constitution changed to be able to serve a fourth term, but was then deposed in a coup d'etat led by the religious right-wing politician Jeanine Áñez, who was later imprisoned for this. Morales went into exile in Mexico, but returned to Bolivia when his former finance minister, Luis Arce, was elected president. Right now, there is a bitter feud going on between Arce and Morales ahead of the 2025 elections, something that has to some extent paralyzed the alliance known as Movimiento al Socialismo, Movement for Socialism, in which they are both members. The country is rich in lithium, and in recent years has oriented itself economically towards Russia, something which the conservative parties, which are mainly allied with Western imperialism and the U.S. have opposed. National news. In the U.S. and in Europe, there has been a resurgence of reactionary, far-right forces which are claimed by the liberals, so-called progressives and left-wing, and the opportunists to represent a new fascist threat. To confront this, the old formula of the so-called Popular Front is presented as the solution. For the a multi-party cooperation established under the name of the Popular Front to, as they say, prevent the election of a far-right prime minister is presented as an example to follow in our country as well. The Popular Front in France is an electoral scheme that was announced shortly after the call for early elections by political forces that have led the promotion of fierce anti-popular policies from government positions such as the Socialist Party or have been put to the test in the trap, disorientation, and deactivation of popular discontent, such as Mélenchon's La France Insoumise and the mutated French Communist Party. Their collaboration is not something new. The anti-right and anti-far right fronts have a long history in presidential, parliamentary, and local elections in France, the latest example being the 2022 parliamentary elections, when these forces formed the new Popular Ecological and Social Union. However, as confirmed in the European elections and over the past few years, they have not been able to do anything to block the strengthening of the extreme right, despite their claims of being able to do so. Let us look at some examples. On the question of high prices, they present as a solution the establishment of a permanent tax on excess profits to be extended to all sectors and not just to energy, as well as the establishment of a tax on financial transactions to discourage speculation. In France, which is also the case in Greece, social democracy and its satellites emphasize the super profits of monopolies, which are modified according to the interests of their shareholders, taking advantage of the possibilities offered by anti-popular legislation. At the same time, they sweep under the carpet the enormous profitability of French and foreign corporate giants, guaranteed, first of all, by the intensity of labor exploitation and the countless tax exemptions, of course, legal and institutionalized, to which they not only turn a blind eye, but also play a leading role in their expansion. They also advocate for the establishment of genuine European tax equality by abolishing the unjustified tax breaks received by the richest European states. Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, and Sweden, according to them, must contribute their share of the European budget. This reveals the Popular Front's real concern, that is, demanding better conditions for French capital in competition with other states. Regarding wages, they propose measures to make transparency within each company compulsory, to set a maximum authorized wage to reduce the gap of 1 to 20 between the lowest and highest wages in a company. Their program notably lacks any commitments to wage increases, particularly in the current inflationary climate. Instead, they propose a fair equalization of wages on the downside, which they misleadingly label as so-called justice. In other respects, they express concern about the so-called democratization of business and call for a limit on the share of profits distributed to shareholders for a better distribution of wealth. What they are really suggesting is that a fair capitalism is possible, where business profits and popular needs can thrive simultaneously. On the issue of imperialist war, their core position is what is known as strategic autonomy of Europe, which leads to greater militarization and intensified exploitation, allowing them to more effectively defend the interests of their monopolies, complementing, of course, those of NATO. Here, their alignment with the Macron government is unmistakable, while the position of Le Pen's party also converge in the same direction. By agreeing to align itself behind NATO, the European Union is part of a U.S. strategy to escalate tensions around the world. We reject any alignment with another power. This is what they say, adding that it's necessary to ensure our geopolitical relations and military autonomy. In the current context of an impending crisis and preparations for war, with the EU and France entering a war economy, the options for French capital are expanding in the lead-up to the parliamentary elections. This concerns both who will lead the government with anti-popular policies and the support from all bourgeois parties. This is the true purpose of the Popular Front in France, revealing the reality behind their anti-far-right slogans and confirming the enduring role of social democracy in maintaining the stability of capitalism. The political forces, such as the Social Democrat and Liberal parties, which have long implemented anti-popular policies detrimental to the French people and supported the EU and NATO strategies, cannot counterbalance right-wing candidates like Le Pen. In fact, through their so-called democratic and progressive policies, they are driving discontented workers and popular forces towards such reactionary and right-wing parties, which disguise themselves as pro-people. These forces are essentially promoting the same path that has led to the strengthening of the far right in France and elsewhere. The answer to both the far right and the new false dilemmas between reaction and progress can only come from a rising workers' and people's movement. This movement, through class struggle, must target the root causes that gives rise to these reactionary political currents, the EU, imperialist competition, and wars.
You've been listening to New Worker News on 92.9 FM WZML, your home for local, national, and international news, all from a working class perspective. New Worker News is the official organ of the Communist Workers Platform. If you're a worker, we would like to hear from you. You can reach us at cwpusa@protonmail.com. Again, that's cwpusa@protonmail.com. If you would like more news from a worker's point of view, visit us at newworker.us. You can find weekly articles on events happening all over the country and internationally. If you've enjoyed the program and wish to see more working class reporting, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/New Worker. And thank you for listening to New Worker News on 92.9 FM WZML.